Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Hope you all had an amazing holiday last week. We have Rachel Bovard in the house this morning for Sagar and an amazing show planned. Rachel, did you have a nice holiday? It's great to have you here.
I did. Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so for guests today, we've got Zed Jelani on. He's going to be talking about the stimulus and the sort of media divide between Republicans and Trump and the conservative hosts on Fox News. We've got Nina Turner on talking about her congressional campaign and how she would be as a member of Congress. But we wanted to start with the big news that broke yesterday evening, which is after a lot of will he or won't he sort of reality style drama, Trump did decide to sign the relief bill that had passed both the House and the Senate. He did it, typical Trumpian fashion. Nobody knew which way it was going to go. And then finally he signs it with this bizarre statement, trying to paint this as a win, as if he actually got something for putting everybody's lives, on the line here and toying with people's lives as they're facing a financial cliff. If we can throw the Trump statement up here on the screen. He talks about, we're signing this bill to restore unemployment benefits, and says that the Senate is going to now start the process for a vote that increases checks to $2,000. We'll see about that. Repeal Section 230, not going to happen. And also start an investigation into voter fraud. Mitch McConnell's statement didn't mention any of these things as sort of concessions that Trump ultimately got out of this. Rachel, what did you make of this whole back and forth?
Well, I think this process was entirely schizophrenic. I mean, to your point, I actually think Trump had a lot of leverage here to sort of force the issue on payments, but he wasted it. By pivoting on this, he just wasted a lot of time for absolutely nothing. I don't think Senate Republicans can be trusted to do any of the things Trump says they're going to do. They'll do a couple show votes, they'll head pat it. But again, the leverage is gone. Sure, the House is going to come back and vote today on $2,000 checks. But it's up in the air if Senate Republicans will do the same. But I think broadly speaking, this is the frustration people have with the legislative process. These deadlines that affected real individuals were knowable things. Congress and the president have known about them since June. The fact that we got all the way to the end of December, the fact that we had this sort of legislative peacocking instead of actually trying to help people, I think is just part and parcel the frustration that people have with what goes on in Washington, D.C. So again, Trump, as he does so often, I think had a good instinct, but completely wasted it and threw a lot of people into economic uncertainty because of it. And I don't think that that's a very positive outcome.
Well, and here's the thing that really enrages me is if he actually wanted $2,000 checks, he could have gotten them, right? Could have gotten them by pushing for them consistently from the beginning. He has so much sway with the Republican caucus. If he really made this a red line thing, there is no doubt in my mind that people would be on the verge of receiving $2,000 checks right now. But instead, he does it in this ridiculous way. We had actually reported on here how he had been floating this idea of $2,000 checks and his aides had talked him out of it. So he's clearly been thinking about this for a while. But instead, it creates this worst of all worlds situation where, people are really counting on these unemployment benefits for 12 million Americans that actually did lapse because of his delay. And people are going to have to go back in and re-register and may miss out on one of the payments because of him monkeying around with this. People worried about being evicted. I mean, there were small businesses worrying that they can stay open. And so this wasn't without a cost, ultimately. This really put a lot of stress and anxiety on people at a critical time of year during the holiday season. And for what? Ultimately for nothing, right? I mean, very unlikely, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, that you're ultimately going to get those $2,000 checks through, regardless of what he says. And so all he does is create sort of maximum chaos without actually achieving the result. And again, the thing that kills me is the result was actually achievable if he really cared about it. But of course, he doesn't really care about it. He just wants the chaos in the show.
Yeah, it was within reach. And I think that's, again, why it was so infuriating. His entire leverage was his signature on that bill. And he got the House back to vote on this question. He would have forced the Senate to act on this question, which they will probably ignore now. To be quite frank, they have no reason to take it seriously because Trump has removed his own leverage from this. So again, Trump has created chaos, but I also recognize Congress as a co-equal branch of government here. They should have dealt with this problem far in advance. They should have been putting $2,000 checks on the table or larger, right? They're a legislative body. They can make these determinations, but they didn't. And so no one comes out wreathed in glory here, for sure.
Yes.
But Trump really sort of stepped in it, I think, by making this delay ultimately pointless.
Yeah, well, and that is the thing, is like, there were no actually good actors in any of this. And of course, Mnuchin comes out looking ridiculous because everybody assumed that he was negotiating on behalf of the White House and that the White House was on board. They were the ones who initially actually floated cutting the $1,200 offer down to $600. Everyone assumed that that was actually the White House position. And then in the end, it all goes off the rails. So what happens now? Today in the House, there's scheduled to be a vote on the $2,000 checks. That is likely something that can get through the House. The question is, and we have Nancy Pelosi, saying that essentially she will have a recorded vote today on a standalone bill to raise direct relief payments to $2,000. This was, AOC noted, this was her amendment along with Rashida Tlaib. You have some voices who've been pushing for this for a long time. Actually, weirdly, Kamala Harris, back at the beginning of this crisis, was pushing for $2,000 and now seems to be nowhere to be seen. But on the other hand, you have some burgeoning bipartisan opposition to actually giving people the help that they need. I know one that caught your eye, Rachel, was Mitt Romney, who was another one who at the beginning of this crisis had been in support of direct payments and now is opposing these checks, saying we can't just have free money. What did you make of that switch from Romney?
Yeah, I mean, the Romney pivot, right? We've seen it before. We'll see it again. I just find it very disingenuous. I understand intuitively that the right wants to crack down on spending. Like, that has just defined the Republican Party for so long. But it's a really disingenuous way to do it when you're completely fine with every other, part of spending in this giant, $1 trillion bill. You've never raised opposition to the fact that this bill has $4 million for murder hornet eradication, right? Has, $1.6 billion for a beach restoration project in Schumer's home state of New York. That constitutes free money as well. And I think it's just hurting the Republican cause generally when the only spending you can talk about is the one that's going to go directly to working families. I saw someone put out a tweet that said, hey, if I change my name to Raytheon, will I get a check finally? And, I think that that's a correct sentiment because, this is going to distract the right and diminish them for years to come if they don't actually take on the spending problem in totality and just focus on the parts that are convenient for them, which put working families in inconvenience. I
mean, that Raytheon thing is so spot on because we covered here how defense contractor CEOs sent in a letter of like, hey, we need our bailout, and days later, it's written into the bill. Whereas for ordinary people, it's like, you got to beg, borrow, and steal to even get any minimal amount of help here. And you've got people like Romney and also Larry Summers, neoliberal extraordinaire and advisor, by the way, to Joe Biden, making a ridiculous statement that $2,000 stimulus checks would be a serious mistake that could overheat the economy. And, this is very sort of old style thinking that has prevailed within both parties for a long time, decades now. And when you see someone like Larry Summers, who does have the ear of the president-elect, making foolish statements like this about overheating the economy, I think it's very troubling when you consider the landscape that the Biden administration is walking into and the type of thinking and type of policy and budget cutting and austerity mindset that Joe Biden has exhibited throughout his entire career.
Yeah. And, Larry Summers, I don't know, did the bank bailouts overheat the economy? Because, he was completely in favor of that. His friends at Citigroup receiving $45 billion, in 2008, 2009. I suspect those may have overheated the economy as well. But again, this is the old style of thinking that is now going to perpetuate in the Biden administration. Larry Summers has been close to Bill Clinton. He was close to Barack Obama, served in several of those administrations. This is rinse, wash, repeat again and again. So I don't know why we're expecting anything new from these people. We've seen it. And Joe Biden sort of giving us a flavor of that, right? We've seen Joe Biden for 47 years. I don't expect too many changes, and this is just proof of that.
Yeah. If Democrats are smart, they will use this opening that Trump has given them to basically triangulate, Trump versus the rest of the Republican Party, to put Kelly Loeffler and Perdue on the spot heading into these Georgia runoffs and really make it a referendum on these stimulus checks. I mean, I know the House is going to vote on it today. The Senate, all the messaging should be around providing this help to the American people. Do I think that they're smart enough to do that? Do I think that they really care enough to push this issue and make it a litmus test? I'm not so sure about that.
Well, and to just bring it back full circle, this is what's so infuriating about what Trump did, because he was making it about this issue. And he had the leverage to actually force them into a position where they couldn't hide from it anymore. But now we're back to business as usual in Washington.
Yes.
So a lot of sham votes.
Indeed. All right, Rachel, stick with us, and I'm going to tell you what's on my radar. That is next.